and Energy. We are briefly going to go over some confirmation appointments by the governor's office, and then move next to Bill S-115, and act related to miscellaneous agricultural subjects. After that, consideration of an amendment to S-100, the housing bill, and then to hear an amendment, proposed amendment from Senator Chittenden, also to S-100, the housing bill. So with that, I'll just go around the table and see if anyone wants to report out on an appointee that you have. And we'll chip away at this, I think, probably every Friday, several Fridays in a row till we finish the confirmation list. I can prime the pump. We had testimony from in person from, as well as the resume of Sabina Haskell to be reappointed as chair of the Natural Resources Board, and would be looking for a motion to recommend to the Senate that we approve that. So moved. Thank you, Senator McCormick. And Senator McDonald, can you report? Okay, so this is the appointment of Sabina Haskell. Yes. And any discussion about Ms. Haskell? Okay. The fourth emeritus shall call to the Natural Resources Board as chair. Okay. Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. All opposed. So the vote is 4-0-1. Thank you so much. Anyone else have a nominee you'd like to recommend to the group?
Sure. So I had Commissioner John Wheeling. So I chatted with him over the phone. And so would it be useful if I spoke about his credentials or?
Sure, just briefly.
Sure. So yeah,
Intro.
he's been an environmental lawyer for 30 years, was with the Justice Department in DC, the EPA in Boston, and then moved to Vermont, and was back and forth a little bit, but has recently taken over what was, now the commissioner of DEC after Peter Walk has left, and he's loving it. So it's really good to get to know him, and it sounds like he's doing some great work.
Okay.
So it's never boring.
In what position? Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Discussion? Okay. All those in favor of recommending consent, the appointment of John Wheeling as Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation, aye.
Aye.
That is 4-0-1. Thank you. I think moment, given that our schedule shifted a little this morning on the fly, I'd like to switch gears and take up Bill S-115, Natural Miscellaneous Agricultural Subjects. Based on our testimony and committee discussion yesterday, I asked Mr. O'Grady to prepare on behalf of the committee amendment that will then we will vote on as so we have a committee position, but I will, with the agreement of the chair of Senate Finance, bring it to Finance, and they will include it in their report. That's the pathway. So with that, Mr. Grady, if you would join us at the table. We all have a copy of
Okay.
the email.
Right, so this is Michael Grady with Legislative Council. You should have draft number 1.2, that's 115. It's drafted as an amendment from the Committee on Finance. It strikes the last two sections of S-115 as reported by the Committee on Agriculture, which the Section 8 in the Committee on Agriculture was a section that would have provided that municipalities could not regulate or did not have the authority to regulate stormwater from farms, and did not have the authority to charge an operating fee for exempt practices under 10 VSA 1264 D1. So, and then Section 9 was a transition kind of implementation section, which provided that the exemption from municipal stormwater fees for agriculture shall apply prospectively and shall not require municipalities to refund stormwater operating fees assessed prior to the effective date of the act. In its place as a report, it is drafted as a report intentionally so that it doesn't, and not as a study committee, so it doesn't have to go to the Appropriations Committee. And so the Commissioner of Environmental Conservation, after consultation with the Secretary of Ag and with representatives of municipal stormwater utilities, shall submit to the General Assembly a report regarding the regulation by municipal stormwater entities of property subject to the required agricultural practices. The report shall include a recommendation regarding whether property subject to the RAP should be subject to regulation by municipal stormwater utility, a recommendation regarding whether property subject to the RAP should be required to pay an assessment imposed by a municipal stormwater utility, a recommendation whether property subject to the RAP should receive an offset of any stormwater assessment or fee charged by an MS4 or a municipal stormwater utility, and any other recommendation that the Commissioner determines is relevant to municipal stormwater regulation of property subject to the RAPs. And the Section 9 is deleted. That's something you don't see every day, but I didn't want to change the effective date section and create unintended consequences.
Thank you. All right, so we have any questions for council?
So we're leaving the question unresolved at this point.
I might be alone in the wilderness, but I'm pretty certain that, in my opinion, the issue is resolved, but others disagree. I mean, for example, St. Albans lists their MS4 as a NIPD's permit, and it is a NIPD's permit.
Can you remind me, can you what an NIPD's permit?
Yeah.
National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. It's under the Clean Water Act. There's 4 broad categories of NIPD's permits that EPA generally issues, but they also can delegate that authority to the states, and then the states can require entities like MS4 to comply with the NIPD's permit. US EPA's NIPD's rules said that non-point source pollution from an agricultural operation does not require a NIPD's permit. Doesn't require a NIPD's permit. So this NIPD's MS4 permit is regulating something that US EPA says doesn't need a NIPD's permit.
Okay. And if so, I think I don't know if you heard, we've been going through Bill's, I don't know if you were in the room to hear Commissioner Beeling's comments yesterday about the EPA inquiry into.
I wasn't. I mean, I saw what was sent to Commissioner Belling, the email from EPA, and I thought that was an artful email from EPA because what they sent was the federal rule that says MS4 permits can include conditions in them, and that the MS4 conditions need to be complied with by those subject to the MS4. And there are conditions in the MS4 permit where a municipality could say, hey, this says we're supposed to regulate sub-jurisdictional stormwater. This says we're supposed to regulate all stormwater that's not regulated by the state. I could see how a municipality could hang its hat on that and then hang its hat on the rule that US EPA sent. So I thought that was artful. They didn't actually say that farming is exempt or farming is subject. It just said that the MS4 can have conditions that can be applied by them. I thought that was a great email from EPA. It was
finesse. Okay.
But when you look at the MS4, it says the authority that being applied is the authority under 10 VSA 1264, the state stormwater permit, the stormwater statute. That statute excludes agriculture. So, I mean, every way that you go at it, in my opinion, you run into a provision that says agricultural stormwater runoff is not subject to a NIPSES permit, so it's not subject to federal. Go with the state way, it says it's exempt from the Secretary's authority. Municipalities can't regulate it under their bylaws. Maybe you can make an argument that as a utility that it's assessed, but the utility that's assessing it is the MS4 stormwater utility. So you're circling back to the federal rule that says doesn't need a NIPSES permit. So I'm of the mind, and I might be alone, that it's pretty clear, but others disagree.
Then what is the report supposed to be about?
I think the report is supposed to come to some consensus recommendation. And that recommendation, there's Solomon babies here. You can just say that the MS4 still retains the regulatory authority, but then farms aren't going to be assessed a fee, or farms are going to have an offset of a fee. And so there's ways that they could get to a consensus recommendation.
One thing we talked about yesterday was the difference between assessing a fee and whether that constituted regulation. And I'm wondering,
so a stormwater fee is just like a sewer rate, which means if you don't pay it, they put a lien on your property. And if you don't pay it long enough, they can foreclose on your property. I don't see how that's not regulation.
I don't, all I'm saying is I'm raising that as a question because I've heard that as a question. So I'm not trying to make the case. I'm just wondering if that's a valid distinction that someone might explore as part of doing this work.
The only valid distinction I see is it's a language argument, because 1264 says that the state can't regulate required agricultural practices, and 4413 says municipal bylaws can't regulate required agricultural practices. It really should say can't regulate the property subject to the required agricultural practices, but it doesn't say that. So the municipalities might say, oh, we're not actually regulating practices, we're regulating the property. That's the language argument.
Does it make any, all right, so the assessment versus regulation thing is not necessarily meaningful here.
I mean, it's a lawyer's argument. And the court could, doing a plain language reading, give credence to it.
Okay, so in the amendment, I'm wondering about whether or not that distinction can be explored using the language we have in front of us.
So I think it's there. I think it's in that first page 1, line 17, whether property subject to the RIP should be subject to the regulation.
Okay, and is someone going to say if they try to draw a distinction between regulating the property and assessing a fee, if we don't say assessment on or
Well,
something?
that's the subdivision 2,
Yeah,
whether they should be required to pay an assessment.
or fee. Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that the assessment, a discussion about the assessment of a fee wasn't precluded by talking about whether or not they were subject to regulation or the property subject to regulation. Okay, thank you for that. Any other committee questions for Mr. O'Grady? Sir?
Mr. Chair, I tried to bring up, I don't expect to have this answer, but a situation in my neighborhood where farm practices are ditching, perhaps the tile drains and others. When it rains a lot, the local road is covered with water and the bridges and culverts are being eroded. And the town's solution, one of their solutions is just to simply close the road and declare it no longer a road because it's words to repair and maintain the road. Wonder how the resolution of this problem, how it gets resolved, and that's.
So I would, Is
This
the-
bill isn't gonna resolve it.
is this what town?
Williamstown and Brookfield.
Okay. So both of them are not MS4s. I would say if they were MS4s, they probably wouldn't be able to shut down those roads because they're part of the system that is supposedly subject to the MS4 NIMTs permit. But since they're not, I do think under the road and bridge laws, the towns can discontinue service of a road,
Can what?
can discontinue a road. They have to follow a process for that. Now, if there's a culvert that's failing and that culvert poses a risk of flooding, I think you've gotta probably need to talk to DEC's flood program about that.
Or you're trying to find a different excuse, a
Right,
different rationale for closing,
right.
acknowledging.
Because they're not an MS4, I would say you don't have that regulatory flag there.
So here's.
And
I appreciate it. I will stop this. I'm not gonna find an answer here, but I wanted to bring it up. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for council? Okay, all right. So, thank you. I think in that case, is there any other committee discussion on the amendment? Or actually, we would be making a recommendation to the finance committee.
It's just, I want to make sure, I want to verify my understanding. Council is of the professional opinion that the farmers don't have to pay. But you acknowledge that a case can be made.
Committee.
I am of the
Contrary.
opinion that the municipalities lack authority under both state and potentially federal law
Yeah.
to regulate agricultural stormwater runoff. But there are other entities that disagree, and I think they have a potential argument under the state's sewer and water authority. But even then, I think there's a question, but I admit that there's an argument, and because there's an argument and there's disagreement on the language proposed by the Committee on Agriculture, I can see why you want to put this report into law.
Okay, so so your counsel, based on your reading of the law, is what it is, but that you can't predict what another court would say, that someone can make a case. And the world is full of surprises.
I can predict that the municipalities that have MS4s are going to continue to vociferously oppose the exemption, and so maybe you want to find a consensus.
So we're not doing the study just to be nice to a colleague. That's what I'm getting at. That is a substantive kind of decision.
I'm political.
Yeah.
And just so the committee knows, I've talked to Senator Starr about it yesterday, went back over where we were, what the proposed solution was. And I thought, rather than strike the sections that say it's an unresolved, there's a legal argument that could be made both ways. Who knows how it gets sorted out? You could say, in order to avoid that conflict, you could strike those sections from 115, which was one of the things I heard recommended. I had expressed the opinion that it was maybe more helpful to everyone to have the study group come back with a recommendation, because then the next legislature will at least does two things. One, we might have a better understanding. Two, it can put the topic on the table as opposed to just severing it from the bill and offending people who might say, I want this resolved now. Say, in my mind, since we can't resolve it now, let's not just sever the provision and leave it unattended. This would be take out 8 and 9 and take a step to try to solve the problem.
And the report is developed by the Secretary of Agriculture.
No, by the Commissioner of Environmental Conservation. After consultation.
Oh, after consultation, yeah.
So we have the commissioner, we have the Secretary of Ag, and we have representatives, municipal stormwater utilities. And they can call on anyone they want beyond that. But it creates what I thought of as a balanced core group of the 3 parties most interested.
Thank you. So trying to digest this. So you're pretty sure that there, at least from a legal perspective, we should not be requiring that farms should be exempt from stormwater utility fees.
I
From all
think
the-
I would I think they are exempt from municipal regulation by
Okay.
municipalities.
Okay. The only, and even the letter from the EPA, which is what, has been something that gave me pause to say, we don't want to jeopardize our delegation. Even that you think was not necessarily
But let's talk about delegation.
yeah.
So if they de-delegate the state, they're taking on permitting of over 90 wastewater treatment facilities, over 1,000 construction general permits a year, over 550 farms. Who knows how many multi-sector general permit coverages, NIFTY's pesticide applications. And yesterday, Administrator Regan said that EPA doesn't have enough funding to do what they're charged with now.
Okay.
So
So they're not.
you have to view that consequence in the broader
Okay.
context.
Yeah, it's it does make me wonder if we need to do a study. I feel like a study is, or not a study, a report would be a nice way to try to bring everybody together. But
Yeah, I think for me,
it's also simpler, like, because we're running out of time, but
because we're basically out of time
yeah,
and finance has to vote the bill out, and we still had questions around the disputants
yeah,
perspectives. I thought it was, and personally, I didn't think it was helpful to simply strike the provisions and say, well, we're not going to pass something that chooses the answer for one side or the other when there's a
Right.
dispute. And on the other hand, if we just take those provisions out to avoid that, then I feel like we've just left everyone in the lurch, so that's okay.
yeah,
A study group and a recommendation might advance us towards having a clear solution that everyone can live with next year. So as council was saying, maybe that works out that they are not regulating the property, but they are assessing a fee on the property, regardless of the fact that it is a property that has RAP, and they give a credit system that V-Trans gets for efforts made to regulate water on that property. Might be, it might be an understanding that people could live with. I don't know. I was trying not to just sidestep the whole thing
right.
and leave it to others another day.
I could also picture it being an opportunity to revisit the RAP requirements and the funding with the ag water quality funding.
That would
Just-
be big opening.
Well,
The rats.
yeah, well, maybe that's too big.
Well, the last time we revised the required agricultural practices, I think it went through a really lengthy process, but I think.
No, it's fair enough.
So I don't know what the committee's pleasure is here, to recommend or not. We've been asked by the chair of finance to speak on the issue. So we could speak it by saying, let the bill stand as is. We could say strike 8-9. We could offer this recommendation, which is it in between position?
Do we take a vote on this as an amendment we're recommending?
No, it was the amendment. Chair Cummings preferred that finance that has possession actually take our recommendation if they agree with the recommendation.
So we just
They
comment.
would put it in their report. So we'd be doing a straw poll, so we can say to finance, we've looked at this, here's what Natural's position is on this, and then we'll take it. Finance will make its own decision.
Do you need a vote for that?
I do.
Okay, I
An
move.
informal vote.
I move that this committee recommend to the finance committee that it adopt the language found on draft number 1.2 of S-115, dated today at dated yesterday, 4/32.
Mr. Chair, Senator asked for a poll of the committee members to support the
Yes.
finance. As opposed to this is not a committee action, this is a poll of the committee's members.
Okay. So straw poll for, just so we can, when we're in finance. we can-
So you don't need a motion.
Well, It's
That's
my-
why I asked.
It's helpful.
So as to not make a
it's helpful
motion
to
if it wasn't there.
articulate it so that we know exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
So then I would say, is there any further committee discussion? If not, all those in favor of recommending this amendment to the Senate Committee on Finance, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Anyone abstaining?
I recommend that might answer the questions that I have brought up sometime in the foreseeable future.
Are we talking about the road question? Okay.
The study may shed some light on that issue. Before it's done.
Okay, so I'm seeing a yes, a yes, a yes. There was?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I will report 401 recommendation by this committee to finance.
You only need one more vote in finance.
We
Right.
we
And
do
then
have a
you
running
second.
start on it. Thank you very much. Right, so in a moment, we should have a visit from Ms. Chakowski on S100. Do we have copy? Yes, we do.
We have all kinds of copies.
And after that, we'll have Senator Shipman in who's proposing another.
But I don't have this amendment yet. Ellen just emailed me and said there might be more changes, so
Two
don't.
Senator Shipman. Okay, well, I guess I'm hoping he'll show up with copies if it's
Me
still
too.
a live subject.
Yeah.
So we are at ease until Councilor Chakowski arrives. Actually, we're waiting for council to go through the full amendment that was presented to the Economic Development Committee. So I'm guessing 15 minutes from now, something like that.
Senator Chitman, Ellen emailed me and said there are more changes. Do you have a copy?
To you right now, and I'll be back.
Thank you.
I'll be in transportation.
Okay.
You want me earlier.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
So how long are we in neutral?
We're still live.
Theoretically, we're still on the air, and
Are we in session?
Councilor Chakowski is supposed to be here
Any second.
any second.
So we are not standing at ease.
We're just sitting at ease for a moment, but
Breathing.
this is going to be a little bit of a start again, stop again, start again.
Mm. Okay.
Probably working on the latest.
Like the old days.
The old days.
The pre-Tim Ash days.
Well, Sarah McCormick, you have a fine voice and an extensive knowledge of song. Maybe you could read this in like a song while we're waiting for council to arrive.
You can't afford my fee. Well, actually, I sing for free for the Senate all the time. I would feel funny.
Yeah, no. Do you travel with your guitar generally? Always a guitar.
Do you have a Thompson submachine gun in the case?
No, it looks like it sometimes. I've lost a lot of my chops on the guitar. It's a shame, use it or lose it.
When you injured your arm, did that affect your dexterity?
It did not take away dexterity. What did was I spent about 1.5 years not playing. Remember, I had this strange apparatus to reset it. And I've never really recovered it. Yeah, well,
Madison Square Garden days are over.
Yeah.
When was the last time you played the golf?
Here we go. Okay, good morning.
Did you do a warm up for other groups?
Good morning,
Busy
Mr.
those
Kowski. So for people following, we have, we're returning to S100, the housing bill. As people will recall, there have been a number of, we had an amendment, we had a follow-on amendment in this committee, further clarifying the language on NDAs and enhanced village centers. There was a further interest in clarification on the part of the Economic Development Committee around the topic of when we say there's a sunset on 2026, what do we mean precisely by that? As well as a clarification around, we said a group of 10 alleging a common injury to a feature protected by the chapter. They wanted, the request from Economic Development was to be more precise about that. So that discussion followed, and then because amendments were being added to amendments, the pathway for moving it forward by agreement between the chair of this committee and the chair of Economic Development was we could revise our, and I checked with Secretary Bloomer, we'll offer a substitute committee report, and all the changes or clarifications will be in a single document. That way we won't have 3 layers of amendments all being presented on the floor. And Ms. Chakowski's put that all together. I walked through this yesterday with Economic Development. And now it's our turn to go through it as well. So, and we will have a formal motion and vote on this because we'll be moving to substitute our this for our report. So with that, Ms. Chakowski, thank you so much. The committee members want to walk through the entire thing, or do you want to see focus on changes made since we last approved it?
I think just changes made.
Okay. That sounds efficient of us. Okay, so Ms. Chakowski, take it away.
Good morning, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I am here today on draft 1.1 of S100, but this is a substitute report. So it's dated 3/22/2023, 6:19 p.m. 6:22 p.m. And then also Jude just passed out the summary of the substitute amendment. So you have that as well. But there are 2 changes from what your committee discussed previously. Oh, and with me today is Calista Smith, who's one of the student clinicians. She's currently a student at Vermont Law School, but she's with our office for the semester.
Okay.
And you will see more of her next week.
All right.
But
Welcome to Senate Natural Resources and Energy.
she sat with me on the floor for the Clean Heat debate. So now she's going to learn about S100 a bit. So in your amendment, there are 2 changes from what you previously discussed. The first starts at the bottom of page 2, and it's in the second instance of amendment. The second instance of amendment amends section 6 of S100, which is the section on who is allowed to appeal in municipal permitting. And so your committee worked on this language related to a common injury to a particularized interest. So any 10 persons who allege a common injury to a particularized interest protected by this chapter, who are a combination of voters or real property owners, are eligible to appeal. And so there's new language at the bottom of page 2 that reads, as used in this subdivision, a particularized interest shall not include the character of the area affected. Character of the area affected is a well-litigated term in municipal law.
It's like historic district, or something like that.
It's broader than historic districts. It's the Queechy test primarily.
I think the way that the concern was described to me was that it was one of the ways in which appeals could be brought. That in some cases might be judged exclusionary, an effort to exclude because something would be new and different in some way. And I think because of the concern that I heard about mostly from the Economic Development Housing Committee was that there's a long history of action that becomes exclusionary and makes it more difficult to develop housing. And if this was a subjective, somewhat subjective criterion that could be obstructive. So that was the further explanation of it.
Are you, is that your description of the Queechy test?
No,
No, okay, no, that's not.
character, the area discussions I've heard of, but I'll leave to our council to really get into it in detail.
Sure. So the character of the area is one of the elements specifically related to aesthetic concerns. And so in Title 24, it's primarily used in conditional use review, although it is used in other review as well. But it's the character of the area affected as defined by the purpose or purposes of the zoning district, within which the project is located, and specifically stated policies and standards of the municipal plan. This is the aesthetics. So there's a lot of case law on how this is defined. You will recall that elsewhere in S100, you do deal with the character of the area. So it is a perpetual conversation when we talk about both Act 250 and municipal zoning.
And in this case, this is just related to appeals of municipal law, correct?
Yes, and it's specifically being used for the 10 persons category.
Yeah, having chaired a district commission and worked with the Queechy criteria, the idea is that aesthetic judgments are subjective, but that does not necessarily mean they're arbitrary or capricious. That there are subjective aesthetic judgments that a reasonable person acting in good faith could be predicted to agree with. And the terms in the Queechy decision, I believe, is something like patently offensive or offensive to the average sensibility.
Yes, shocking and offensive.
Shocking and offensive to the average, and it is contextual.
Yeah.
And given that the thing might not be inappropriate someplace, but here it is. And again, it stems specifically from a hillside filled with skylights that reflected the sunlight every afternoon. Was the
So that was partially right. Queechy test, Act 250. I don't know to what degree that is similar or different from this on a municipal level.
I do think the Queechy test is used in municipal review as well, but I can't at the moment speak to the differences in the case law of how it's interpreted.
So good call.
Trying to understand the consequences of not having 250 review of stuff. We're told that when Act 250 reviews stuff, it's expensive. We're trying to deal with that. So when we remove Act 250, are the things that Act 250 tries to make sure don't happen? Are there other mechanisms in these areas that will tackle the things that Act 250 used to tackle to make sure that things that folks don't want to have happen don't happen? And what I get is, what I sort of hear is, well, active fifty is expensive and complicated, and there are better and more efficient, modernized ways to deal with those things. And we should be able to move ahead more quickly. What steps in to fill that gap? We're told that, yes, you can hook up to sewer systems that we know will, in big storms, are going to put raw sewage in downstream, and that's okay. But this bill says that that's okay to do that. And what are other things that don't get reviewed, and then by not reviewing them become okay to do? That's what I'm looking. Makes me go, something's out of control here. So. Okay. Getting 10 people to object to something in the town of Brookfield around the Brookfield floating bridge and whatever would be a tough thing to do. There are not that many people that live there. Getting 10 people to object to something in Montpelier or Burlington would be pretty simple. So it's appears to be a different standard.
Can you help me remember this amendment to the appeals provision? Is that ongoing, or is it also time limited as part of this window through 2026?
No, it's permanent.
Yeah, just want to make sure. Right. I'm trying to ask without asking you to recite all the other levels of review, what remains, sort of to the point of what's in McDonald's question. If this particular criterion is no longer part of the basis for an appeal, is there a brief way to answer the question of what does remain subject, eligible for appeal?
Not just it's not eligible for appeal. Where is the review upon which someone might appeal? The review, I don't see where the review takes place.
It's so this is applied to, planning, zoning, municipal bylaws. It's when you're out of, if you're, regardless of Act 50, if you're in a municipal proceeding on permitting, that's the domain of this appeal.
Yes, so municipal review may still occur depending on the specific bylaws of that municipality. So the review of the character of the area still may occur at the municipal level.
Or may not.
Or may not, yes. And so, right, because it would only occur in towns that have zoning and that actively use that criteria in their review.
Well, Senator McDonald, you opposed the bill, so I'm not surprised that we're having this.
Well, I'm trying to see if I'm missing something in the bill that
I'm asking.
things are being looked at that I missed in this, and that's what.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So I'm looking at other members of the committee. Is this a change to our amendment, clarification about the scope of the limitations on appeal that is acceptable to the committee? That's the question in front of us in this first case. Okay. Senator Watson, as a thumbs up. Senator McCormick.
I have the same doubts as Senator McDonald.
So you are opposing this change?
Yeah.
Right, and we have 4 members of the committee present, which leaves us in a position. I support this amendment, this provision of this proposed amendment. This leaves us in a position at the moment of 2 and 2. In order to move this, we'll need to, I'm going to see if we can connect with Senator White, that she might be able
She
to
hasn't tried.
Zoom this, if she doesn't know that we are hung where we have a hung jury at the moment. And today is the day for, actually, S100 is, I'm trying to think if deadline wise,
We have until Wednesday.
after Wednesday, it's sitting in.
Tuesday would be better.
First is bill currently is in appropriations.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about this? Let's finish the walkthrough. And we'll make a full committee. We'll have a vote on it. So let's go on to the, so no further questions about this provision. Let's go on to the next bit in the proposed amendment. Pro substitute report.
So the next new piece of language starts at the bottom of page 7, but is primarily on page 8. So a new session law provision is being added in the 6th instance of amendment. It's adding a new section, Act 250 exemption requirements. So on page 8, in order to qualify for the exemption established in 6,000,
The one that changed on page 5.
we've already reviewed it.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So, all right, sorry. So the 3 pieces of language that the Bray et al. Amendment had are in this bill.
Right.
So yes, adding designated neighborhood development areas to the priority housing project cap removal is also on page 5. Your committee did review that.
Okay, not new, but thanks for just flagging it. So
Yeah.
that it was there in the last round of changes. Okay.
Oh yeah, so it's highlighted as both the Bray amendment language, but then there are 2 things that came out of the discussion with Senate Economic Development that are totally new.
And the so-called Bray amendment was the one that we voted a week ago, I think it was. Okay. On to the 6th.
So the top of page 8, in order to qualify for the exemption established in 6001, 3A11 and 3D83. So those are the 2 sunset provisions. The first of which is the 25 or more units in the downtown's neighborhood development areas and growth centers for 3 years. And then the removal of the priority housing project cap that I just mentioned, which is in downtowns, NDAs, and growth centers as well. In order to qualify for those exemptions, a person shall apply for a jurisdictional opinion under 10 VSA 6007, which is the existing jurisdictional opinion section, by July 1, 2026. The jurisdictional opinion shall require that the project shall require the project to substantially complete construction by June 30th, 2029 in order to remain exempt. So it's setting 2 deadlines in relation to the sunset. First, a person who wants to be exempt needs to submit an application for a jurisdictional opinion, which would assert that they are exempt by July 1, 2026. So before the sunset expires. And then the opinion shall say that they will substantially complete construction within 3 years.
So that was clarification, because question came up, well, exactly how do you implement the sunset? What's the bright line test? So council suggested, actually a very useful one, apply for a jurisdictional opinion. Jurisdictional opinion will say your project is currently exempt from Act 250, and then you'll have a document that will provide clarity for anyone who wants to do a priority housing project asserting their exemption from Act 250, so that we don't have a potential for abuse of that, as in English showing up and getting many such jurisdictional opinions that then would be constructed over a decade or more to follow. Came up with a reasonable window with which to be substantially complete. The idea was genuine projects that are slated for construction in the relatively near term, apply, get it, and have an additional 3 years substantially complete. So it's not a policy change. It's a how will you know whether you are qualified for that exemption clarification.
Abuse?
Because I've had training from a teacher who formerly taught 8th grade, I now look at any rule and say, how might this be abused? And I could imagine someone
Circumvented.
applying for many such jurisdictional opinions without the intention of building, with the intention of building over, you could say 2 decades. And which would effectively defeat the sunset for 2 decades. So this says, okay, we're creating a genuine opportunity to build, and we're saying you have 3 years after you've got that JO to substantially complete construction. But that would be trying to provide reasonable latitude and interpretation without undermining our own intent. So that's how I would editorialize on how it's defined. So,
Exercising the
I've been listening.
eighth
for-
graders' talents excellently.
That's right. I've gotten training in this committee. All right. Any discussion, questions for council on this one? So yeah, we're
Hey,
separated.
Mr. Chair, you mentioned that there were 4 people, so now we're down to 2-2 vote. We're really down to 2-2 vote. I don't want to mess things up because someone's absent, so.
Okay. Well, thank you for that offer. So we do have a couple other edits. We should just close out the walkthrough. I think Senator McDonald will come back to that question.
Yeah, so the language on page 9 is language that your committee saw in the Bray amendment. This is the language related to flexibility regarding wastewater. So both neighborhood development areas and enhanced village centers will be required to have at least one of the following: municipal sewer, community or alternative wastewater systems approved by an ANR, or a public community water system. And so that language is both in the NDA requirements and then in the village center requirement, enhanced village center requirements.
So, and we already, we saw this before, basically it was spells out the same criterion, puts them both in enhanced village centers and in NDAs, and trues up the language across the 2 of them. The biggest change that we made was it was more flexible language because it says municipal sewer infrastructure, a community or alternative wastewater system approved by the Agency of Natural Resources, or a public community water system. And we didn't have, for instance, an alternative wastewater system approved by the Agency of Natural Resources previously. Some places where I think that's the kind of solution that will, the super septic system that will end up getting approved. All right, so any questions for council?
And I don't have to leave. They have passed over my bill on the House floor, so I can stay.
Okay, thank you very much. Is the Senator McDonald pointed out that we're missing a member, and rather than being hamstrung by being short a member, our committee willing to take up the question and vote the substitute.
It's in 9th grade or 10th grade. But then sometimes when a family can't make it, it's gonna vote the other way, you agree to not use it as an opportunity to win or delay something. I forget what that was called, log rolling or
Okay.
some terrible term. Stay or take a walk to not allow that to happen. So
Would you
pain in spades.
prefer to vote now, or we could wait till we have the full committee back again?
Whatever you would recommend.
Well, it would be nice to close the week out with this, I think, with everyone knowing that we've moved it forward. There's a lot of interest in the bill. So with that, then I welcome a motion from a member of the committee to amend the committee's report as laid out, as defined by draft number 1.1 of S100. Time and date stamp 3/22/23, 6:17 p.m. And we've just lost our clerk emeritus. So with that, the inexplicable motion for certain bodies. With that, I'm going to say we're going to table this vote until Tuesday when we have a full committee present.
Was that Mark's idea in leaving, or just that happened to be?
Inexplicable, we'll see. We can set this aside. If he returns, we'll have an opportunity to reconsider. With that, though, Senator Chittenden has kindly come to the committee. He has an amendment that he'd like to offer when the bill does come to the floor, and has kindly hit the committee in advance of the floor so we can hear the amendment and understand it better. So with that, Senator Chittenden, thank you for coming to the committee. You want to walk us through your proposal of amendment?
Thank you very much for having me. And I am inclined to currently bring this forward. I haven't yet committed to it. So I just appreciate you finding some time and maybe giving me some thoughts on this before Tuesday or whenever S100 comes up. I also want to start out by just thanking you and the Senate Economic Development and Housing Committee for spending so much time on such an important issue. This was emailed to me today by an advocate that I'm sure all of you have heard from as well. Pass these out. This came out yesterday. This is a UNH poll, the Green Mountain State poll, and it has an open-ended question asking Vermonters what the most important issue to them is. 32% said housing. The next one was cost of living at 9% and 9% taxes. And I did bring my glasses, my vision. That is why I ran for office. I ran for office because there's not enough housing in Vermont. I have 3 older sisters. They all left the state. They're out in Michigan. They're down in South Carolina. They're in Pennsylvania. They went to where there was housing and opportunity. I got 3 kids. I'm just looking for ways to make it so that more neighbors, more current and future Vermonters can live here, while also preserving our bucolic green environment. I want to leave 2 messages with you all today. 1, thank you for everything you've done on housing. It's absolutely important. 2, Act 250 is a great bill. This is not an attack on Act 250. I've heard that term leveled before. Act 250 is what I would call a behavior modifier. It is something that changes and cultivates, and as intended to do so, how development has occurred in the state. This amendment is proposing to look at one of the thresholds that behaves or that modifies behavior in the state. I believe you're all somewhat familiar with this topic, but I'll just give some background and context to where this amendment is originated from. I understand that what came out of economic development was to change the threshold from 10 units within a 5-mile radius over 5 years up to 25 for the entire state. And then you all very, very judiciously suggested that maybe it's just for the areas with a lot of very concentrated planning and zoning in neighborhood development areas, downtown centers, and so on. This is proposing to instead look at communities that have planning and zoning for subdivisions. I grew up in and live in South Burlington. You've been to South Burlington? Been to the University Mall? That's on Dorset Street. So I'm 3 miles south. When I grew up there out in the 80s, it was the Chittenden Farm, the Eau Claire Farm, the Economo Farm. We didn't do very good farming. It's a lot of Virgins clay, so it's tough land to produce on. So somewhat good for dairy cows and so on. But in the 90s, seeing the growth of Burlington, being South Burlington, just south of Burlington, the city did put sewer and water out through this area, and we've seen housing growth. And I, for one, that grew up with both as a countryside, and then now with a lot of great little neighborhoods popping up, I think it's where housing should belong. And the reason why I raise that is, you look where I live, you've been down Dorset Street, I'm right next to the Chittenden Cider Mill, the old Chittenden Cider Mill. Just south of me is Sadie Lane. Sadie Lane is 10 new units that came online about 5-6 years ago. 2 parcels north of me, Link Road, 10 units came online, I want to say 10 or 15 years ago. Right across the street from me, Willowbrook, 10 units came online, I want to say 7 years ago. Just across and very close to the Shelburne town line, it's a 40-acre parcel with 10 units, huge, spacious yards, lots of parking and place to kick a ball around. The reason why there are 10 units on these all little subdivisions is because of this threshold. This threshold is what people weigh when they look at whether or not they want to build. You know all this. I'm just making my pitch.
Can I just double check? So 10 would actually put you in Act 250.
9 plus the singular home. So there are 9 units plus the original residence. So the 9 units plus the original residence, and I could show you who was the original owner. Within 5 years, there's individuals that have moved every 5 years or so on. Point is, when I look at those developments, it's done because of the following. I've talked to my neighbors that have decided to do this, and they said when they approached individuals that know how to build homes, know what it takes to build homes, they're presented an option. You could build 9 units on your land and do this much paperwork costing this much, or if you want to do any more, a singular more, you're going to have to do this much paperwork and it will cost you this much. So it is to avoid Act 250. And I don't see Act 250 as a penalty. I see it in this case as a modifier of behavior. And what this proposal, what this amendment would do for just 3 years, just while, if we all acknowledge, and I have, that we're in a housing crisis for 3 years, rather than modifying behavior, because over the next 3 years, there are going to be 9-unit subdivisions that come up. It's going to continue to happen, avoiding Act 250. They will continue to populate. I would just like to see, to address our housing crisis, to get higher density housing in communities that have planning and zoning, maybe more than 9 units, when they are abiding by all of the rules that also govern these developments, meaning agricultural lands, conserved areas, all of the rules of the communities that have planning and zoning. So as I anticipate these communities, housing developments to occur, this would just allow for them to still stay with that much paperwork, conforming to the paperwork of those communities, but maybe building 15 units, maybe building 19 units, what the land would require, just so that that 10-unit threshold isn't modifying behavior, driving less housing. And that way we keep less development, less sprawl, less growth out in areas that don't currently have as many development pressures as some of our higher density areas. That's my amendment. It's for 3 years. I'm not sure I'm going to bring it forward, not asking for a vote. I'm just hearing from advocates. Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns, they talked about the grand bargain, and when they came out this week, and I'm hearing from many advocates on this issue, they just say this is something that the communities with planning, zoning, and subdivision can do. They know how to make these houses come online. And the people that know housing on the ground, the municipalities, those that are involved in this is something they think that over the next 3 years could do a lot to make it easier to stay here, live here, work here, and thrive here in the great state of Vermont.
Any committee questions for Senator Schumer? Senator Watson.
Thank you. Thinking about the aspect that this is for 3 years, I'm trying to situate myself in the bill. Is the 3-year limit just elsewhere in the language, like in that subdivision?
So I am under the impression that there's been 3 different versions, and I'm glad Alan's still here. So if the 3-year thing is in a different version of the amendment, that's my intention. And if I've got the wrong one, can I, before I answer that, can I offer one other? So that's why I have not yet committed to bringing forward an amendment. There's another version of this amendment that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, which is, I know you restricted it to where there are downtown village centers and so on. One other notion I propose to different housing advocates is communities that have those downtown centers, those development areas, those designated high priority. Those are communities that understand development, zoning, and planning. Maybe the entire municipalities might be another middle ground. Just my understanding is just leaving it to those specific sections might only be 0.3% of the state, 41 square miles out of 91. I'm just looking for a little bit more of a way for housing to be built. So my apologies if the 3 years is not in this. It's just, that's my intention.
That's intent.
But I'm looking for feedback.
Okay.
I think the 0.3% is an interesting figure. I don't know that I think it tends to suggest that people are far more limited than what the provisions apply for. For instance, we're lifting the caps entirely on priority housing projects. So that 0.3% might well support a lot of dense development. Many, who knows exactly, each municipality that has such an area can choose for itself. At the village center level, it's up to 50 units, and then the enhanced village centers. And then for growth centers, designated downtowns and neighborhood development areas, it's unlimited. So
I think it's great. What my point and why I'm using your time today, which again I appreciate, is that I will predict that additional 9-unit additional housing will come online over the next 3 years. And when they're on large acre parcels where the land is for Jens Clay, which would lend itself to maybe have a nice 15 units. If we just raise this threshold for a limited period of time, that could do a lot to address our housing crunch.
You're welcome.
Well, so so I'm gonna make sure that I'm understanding. So, because we have this other provision in the bill that is around enhanced village centers, which is actually has sort of similar language, which is about, so in order to be an enhanced village center, you have to have zoning, some kind of approved wastewater system, as well as the capacity to manage the zoning or whatever, right? So it's like your town's got to have staff, right? So, you know, it's sort of reminiscent of that, and but what you're driving at is not necessarily to put housing in these designated areas, but just anywhere in the town as long as there's capacity. Basically.
Correct. So the other thing I didn't say here, and this can be pejorative to Act 250, and that is not my intent, but I've heard advocates say Act 250 can be duplicative or redundant. I'm not saying that's it is it or isn't. What I'm saying is it's a behavior modifier. And so what I'm currently proposing, I'm looking for the right contours to sort of just increase that 0.3% or however you want to define it to areas like, I think of South Burlington, Colchester, Bennington, Brattleboro, Montpelier, the towns that have planning and zoning that know how to handle these regulations. That's who I'm hearing from with Ted Brady's advocacy and VLCT's advocacy and housing advocates, that they would very well with their policies be able to steer those 25 or 20, whatever the units are, to be consistent with the character and culture of their community.
Yeah, thank you.
Does that make sense? Thank you for your time. I know you're very busy. Anything else you'd like to share?
No, I think, I guess I have a quick question for council, because I don't remember. No, you could say, please, how many towns in Vermont have permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws? Do you have to, I don't remember. That'll be part of an approved town plan, right? They have an approved town plan.
Right, so the NRB has a list. I can't give you the exact number off the top of my head. I think it's somewhere between 130 and 150, or I think it's roughly 55% of towns are on that list. So I can get you the exact number, but it's a slightly more than half, I believe.
Okay.
That's what I've heard as well.
Yeah.
Somewhere between 50 and 60%.
Okay, yeah, so.
Great. Any further questions for, I mean, I'll say while I'm here, and just so you'll have a sense, the construct we've used all along is that Act 250 has 10 criteria, and I have yet to hear anyone say that when you're developing an area in some way, like a housing project, that they're not valuable. They're all reasonable questions to ask. Impact on municipal water, sewer, services, soil, storm, whatever. All 10. And so the question is someone going to ask all 10 when a project gets proposed? Vermont's answer for 53 years has been, if you're going to go over 10 units, 10 or more units, you're going to be compelled to ask those questions. And if you're smaller than that, you won't necessarily ask those questions. And our effort to say, what is a proxy for more robust planning and management of development and growth would be if you've already demonstrated an appetite for doing that by earning an enhanced designation. And so because of the shared sense that we do want to accelerate the pace at which we're developing housing, we've been a very long way from, I think it's belief that Act 250 reviews are entirely beneficial. That we've also heard anecdotal thing, data around what does it cost to go through Act 250 versus a non-Act 250 process. But so far, I personally haven't heard anything that persuades me that when you're developing at some scale, that it's not worth having that review. The last thing I'd quickly say on duplicative planning is we have the NRB. NRB has been charged with looking at Act 250 overall. There's a series of questions. They're working on a report to deliver by the end of the year. So if there is duplicative planning going on, I think there will be an opportunity for us to see that more clearly and address it in the coming years. But meanwhile, we wanted to provide that 3-year window for accelerated development housing. The other piece of this puzzle is the designation program, which ACCD is also revisiting. And so that as a proxy for planning that's sort of Act 250 light is also being discussed. So I think that's why we're being permissive, about saying, okay, step out of Act 250, but do it in these areas where as best we can see through a designation program that more robust planning and development. Plus the constraint is, I think, somewhat prudent, given that my opinion is that we all appreciate it's very hard to appreciate what didn't happen or how something was developed differently. And Act 250 stood as a good shape for 53 years in terms of trying to place development where we want development to happen.
Closing remark, and I know you're busy, to the construct that you offered there, but my understanding, and I haven't been around as long as others, please correct me, is that Act 250 was really motivated to protect the areas that didn't have planning and zoning. It was a preachy case that where the community didn't have the rules in place for what would be put in there. I like Act 250. Act 250 works for a lot of Vermont. This is just looking at those communities that do have planning and zoning, unlike the impetus for when Act 250 was passed. And this is going to be time limited, 3 years, just to address this housing crunch so that when communities come online, why not a little bit more?
Well, so just by way of reassurance, the total number of entities eligible for housing development under the proposed amendment from this committee is 271. So that's 229 village centers that could become enhanced village centers, 12 NDAs currently, 6 growth centers, and 24 designated downtowns. So there are many places that are going to across the state where accelerated development can happen. It's also possible to say 3 years from now, we might regret projects that have happened. And there's another whole contingent that's you're not hearing from that says we're making a mistake by liberalizing all these provisions. And so I'm not going to argue one side versus the other, but there are two sides that we consider. We tried to find a balance that was as helpful to developing more housing as possible.
I just see across the street from me these 9 units when there's so much more space. They got these huge yards. It's regrettable that development didn't have 17 units.
Well, but so here's, when we run into these limit questions, I would say they get represented as though, oh, we can't develop that because there was a threshold. And I'd say, well, that's entirely incorrect. You can develop across the threshold. You involve yourself in a process that looks at the planning in more depth, or maybe looking in more depth. So if someone says, well, I don't want to do 9, I want to do 25, and I say the planning burden, if we want to call it a burden, will be spread over 25 actually, there's no limit. When you go over 10, you can propose as large a project as you like. But you're gonna be asked those questions. So I just, when we keep hearing about Act 250 is stopping things, it's a choice whether or not to participate in Act 250 or not. There's obviously many thousands, tens of thousands of permits issued with a 99% plus rate of issuance, yes, with conditions. When you look at the timeliness of them, they're general, we could go through the data. I don't know if you've looked at the NRV data, but the permits are issued in a timely way. The data suggests, and yeah, so, I don't want to, I'm not trying to litigate this. It's just, I think people want to appreciate that we're only asking people to plan. All right, I'm gonna stop there. Enough. I just feel like Act 250 is maligned regularly. And although, yeah, the other piece of it was duplicative planning. Many of the people who will tell you sort of horror stories around Act 250. This includes individuals serving at the highest levels of state government. Talk about Act 250 as having prevented them from implementing a project when the record shows that it was the lack of permits at the state or local level. You have to have them in hand in order to gain your Act 250 permit. It says you must have done all your homework, otherwise we're not letting you get your Act 250 permit. Some people will tell that history that I couldn't get my Act 250 permit for X amount of time, but much of that X was actually spent going and getting permits that they would have been required in law to get, even if they weren't in Act 250. So to lay all those permits as the burden of Act 250, I think, lays blame on Act 250 for things that really are not Act 250
I really want to.
based.
I'd love to hear what Senator Watts is trying to say, but I'd just say on permitting, we can't build the houses as a government. It just doesn't work that way. But what we can do is look at permit reform and changes. And that's this threshold, again, is not a penalty. It's just a behavior modifier. And I'm just trying to modify behavior for a short period of time.
Senator Watson.
Thank you.
Last words.
It's okay. Well, so I just want to say, like, I hear you about the duplicative nature that can sometimes happen in communities, including South Burlington, including Montpelier, right? So one of the things that I really like about this bill is the enhanced designation section. Are you familiar with that part at all?
Loosely.
Okay, so I'm sure that it could be better, and that's something that I think could, I'd be interested in suggestions in, but I think the intention of that part is to say if a community like South Burlington or wherever has, meets certain criteria and is able to basically answer those 10 questions, then they are delegated the authority to do the Act 250 process, right? So then it would not be duplicative. So my hope is that communities that have more capacity would be able to get this enhanced designation. And then I think it would accomplish
For the whole municipality.
for the whole municipality.
Is that what's in there?
That's my, maybe I'd have to go back and like double check it, but that's my, is it not? Just the designated area. That would be, so that would be,
Less than 0.01%.
oh, that's something I would be interested in, but that's, that feels like, okay, so fair enough, just with designated areas. So that's clarifying my understanding then, okay. Yeah, my apologies.
Well, the amendment's
Okay.
still a work in progress, so I will maybe
Okay.
dig into that further.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I want to just thank you for your remarks just now. Okay, as I think those are my sentiments as well. No matter how convinced one is that one is right, there comes a point where you got to realize that if you keep saying the same stuff over and over, people get sick of you. So I've been backing off on that, and I thank you for saying, because I think that's important that we said.
Well, yeah, I think if you, we have to vote the substitute report out this committee. But when we do, we'll have finalized a extensive back and forth between the two committees of jurisdiction. And because of the compromise, and if I look, here's one of my shorthands for what is in the background. So here's a 782-page book that is Vermont Planning Development and Land Use Laws annotated. It's complicated. So it's tempting to see a thread that feels attractive to pull on, but there's a lot of context is implicated, and so it's we did our best between two different committees to lean into doing more housing without abandoning planning and review at the level that we think is prudent. That's what
I'm gonna say this, maybe because I know you're busy, and I know it's complicated, and I wouldn't be here with this amendment if really smart people I know that have reached out to me on this, that understand these issues, did say, "Do this." And so they understand that book better than I do. They let anybody run for these offices, so I'm just trying to advocate good policy that I think makes sense for Vermont. But thank you for your time.
Okay.
Just as a way of answering the earlier question, 138 towns, 53%.
53%.
Currently, towns do have
Permanent zoning under the Act 50 list. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I know that
Thank you for your time.
I'll remember that key for a day or two. Okay. So with that, we do have a quorum still, but I'd say given the importance of the amendment, I'd rather not vote with a minimal quorum, but with all the committee present. And that won't be again until Tuesday.
Can I say one other thing?
Yes, please.
What you passed out to you, I do not think is what Chittenden was describing as his method. So just, I know that you had a piece of paper in front of you, but I don't think that is entirely, and I will need to check with them. But it definitely didn't have the 3 years in there. So,
It was just a permanent change. I mean, as best I can read it.
so, and I will check with him to make sure we get the exact language for you to look at it.
Okay.
But just so you know, the miscommunication from Liz Council, so apologies.
Okay, so then in reading this, this is a permanent change to 25 or more if you have permanent zoning and bylaws.
I don't think that's entirely, yeah, so I'll need to check with him, but please disregard what has been passed out, because I'm not entirely sure it reflects what he's just said.
That's what he said. Okay,
So,
has his name on it anyway.
well, then he sent that. Okay, so it doesn't matter, but I will check. and see.
Sure, and it
Yeah.
sounded like he was working on another version
Yeah.
from what he
Yeah.
said. So a work in progress. I don't think we'll know exactly what it will look like until we're on the floor.
Yeah.
Right. So if he is gonna have something, we'll have him back in so we can hear what the floor version is. Otherwise, we won't have a committee position on the amendment. We'll be able to. Okay. So with that, we have actually finished all the scheduled work for this morning, and we will adjourn unless, is there any new business someone would like to bring up before we wrap up?
No, I have other work to do.
A question. So we are going to be talking about our priorities moving forward next week.
Yes. Yeah. And also, so thanks for bringing that up. The bill that you just introduced, S-140, let's do we're scheduling witnesses. We'll take that up after the floor on Tuesday.
Okay, thank
It
you.
may be that we fill that morning
Okay,
between the bill trash and some preliminary testimony.
great. Okay, super.
The nature of this week.
I did.
Okay.
You did get my email.
Yes, yeah. Okay, with that, we are
Suggestions exist.
adjourned.